The church bells rang slow and heavy through the fog-covered valley as Duke Alexander Ravenshade stood at the altar, his posture flawless, his face carved into calm stone. Nobles whispered behind gloved hands, silk gowns brushed polished floors, and candlelight trembled against ancient stained glass. Today was not just a wedding. It was a political triumph. A union meant to stabilize borders, secure alliances, and silence rumors that had followed the Ravenshade name for generations. Alexander had agreed to this marriage with clear eyes and a colder heart. Lady Eleanor Whitmore was known across the realm for her beauty, grace, and obedience. She was everything a duke should marry, or so he believed. When the chapel doors opened, the whispers stopped. Eleanor stepped inside, veiled in ivory lace, her movements careful and restrained. Her head was slightly bowed, her hands clasped at her waist. To the watching crowd, she looked nervous, overwhelmed, perfectly appropriate for a young bride entering a powerful family. Alexander felt nothing unusual as she walked toward him. He did not notice the way her steps hesitated for a fraction of a second. He did not see how her fingers trembled when the priest began to speak. The vows were spoken. The rings exchanged. Applause filled the chapel like a breaking wave. Alexander lifted the veil and kissed his bride, brief and formal. Eleanor's lips were cool, her breath uneven. He dismissed it as fear. Weddings were frightening things. By sunset, the celebrations moved to Ravenshade Castle. Music echoed through the grand halls. Wine flowed freely, and laughter bounced off stone walls that had witnessed centuries of secrets. Eleanor sat beside Alexander at the high table, smiling when required, answering when spoken to, her voice soft and carefully measured. Yet something felt off. Alexander noticed at first when she laughed at a joke he knew she could not understand. Then when she reached for a fork with her left hand, though Eleanor was famously right-handed. Small things, forgettable things. But Alexander had been trained since childhood to notice what others missed. When the feast ended and the guests finally withdrew, servants lit torches along the corridors leading to the ducal chambers. Tradition demanded privacy now. The door closed behind them with a hollow thud. Silence settled. Eleanor stood near the window, her back to him. The moonlight outlined her figure, rigid and tense. Alexander removed his jacket, loosening his collar. "You may sit," he said calmly. She did not turn. "You've been quiet all evening," he continued. "You need not fear me." At that, her shoulders flinched. Not relaxed. Flinched. "I know," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but there was something beneath it. Strain, perhaps, or restraint. Alexander stepped closer. "Look at me." Slowly, she turned. Her eyes met his, and in that instant, something deep inside him shifted. Eleanor's eyes were blue. He remembered that clearly. He had memorized every detail of her portrait during the engagement. Blue eyes like summer skies. These eyes were gray. Not light blue. Not shadow blue. Gray. Cold and stormy. Reflecting pain instead of innocence. Alexander's breath slowed. "Your eyes," he said carefully. Her hand rose instinctively to her veil pin. "They change in different light," she replied too quickly. "A lie." He reached for her hand. She pulled away. Eleanor had never done that before. "You don't like being touched?" he asked. Her jaw tightened. Not without warning. Alexander felt the first true flicker of unease crawl up his spine. This woman did not move like Eleanor. Did not speak like her. Did not carry herself with the same practiced elegance. This woman carried herself like someone used to watching exits. "You're tired," she added quickly. "So am I." She turned away again, clearly hoping to end the conversation. But Alexander could not let it go. "Say my name," he said. She froze. "My name," he repeated. A pause stretched too long. Then, softly, "Alexander." Correct, but hesitant, as if recalled, not known. He stepped closer, his voice low. "What is your favorite place on the Whitmore estate?" Another pause. Her breathing changed. "The Rose Garden," she answered. Wrong. Eleanor had once told him it was the lake. Alexander's heart began to pound, not with fear, but with sharp clarity. "You're not Eleanor," he said quietly. The room felt suddenly smaller. The torches flickered violently, shadows leaping across the walls. She closed her eyes. For a moment, Alexander thought she might faint. Instead, she straightened, lifting her chin. "No," she whispered. Silence crashed between them. Alexander's hand moved instinctively to the dagger hidden beneath his shirt. "Explain," he said. Her voice shook now, but she did not cry. "Her name is Eleanor. She is my sister, my twin." The words struck like thunder. "She couldn't do it," the woman continued. "She couldn't marry you." She panicked. "Our family would have been ruined. So they sent me instead." Alexander stared at her, disbelief hardening into rage. "You stood in a church. You spoke vows meant for another. You deceived an entire court." "Yes," she said, "and I had no choice." He laughed once, cold and sharp. "Everyone has a choice." She finally looked afraid. "If I refused, they would have locked her away. Or worse, I was the expendable one." Alexander turned away, fists clenched. Betrayal burned hot in his chest. This was treason. This was humiliation. The Duke of Ravenshade tricked like a fool on his own wedding day. "I could have you executed," he said. She nodded. "I know." Her acceptance unsettled him more than pleading ever could. "What is your name?" he asked. "Isabella," she replied. The name lingered in the air, heavier than Eleanor's ever had. Alexander looked at her again, truly looked. There was no softness in her eyes, no rehearsed obedience. There was fear, yes, but also resolve. Strength shaped by survival, not comfort. "You will sleep in the adjoining chamber," he said finally. "At dawn, we will decide what becomes of you." She bowed her head. "Thank you for not killing me." He did not answer. As Isabella walked toward the door, Alexander realized something that disturbed him deeply. The woman he had married by mistake was nothing like the woman he had chosen. And, somehow, that made everything far more dangerous. Morning light crept into Ravenshade Castle like an unwelcome witness, slipping through tall windows and touching stone walls that held too many secrets. Duke Alexander had not slept. He stood by the window of his chamber, staring out at the frost-covered grounds, replaying every moment of the night before with ruthless precision. A twin. The word tasted bitter. He had negotiated treaties, crushed rebellions, and outmaneuvered kings, yet he had been deceived by a quiet switch carried out under lace and veils. The insult burned deeper than anger. It was humiliation. A soft knock broke the silence. "Enter," he said without turning. The door opened slowly. Isabella stepped inside, dressed plainly now, without jewels or wedding finery. Her hair was braided simply, her posture straight but cautious. She looked less like a duchess and more like a prisoner awaiting judgment. "You sent for me," she said. Alexander turned. "Sit." She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. Her eyes never left his face, not in defiance, but in readiness. "Everything you say today," Alexander began, "will determine whether you leave this room alive." "I understand." "Then start at the beginning." She inhaled slowly. "Eleanor and I were born minutes apart. She was the first. She inherited everything. Expectations, affection, protection. I inherited silence." Alexander remained unmoved. When the marriage proposal arrived, our parents celebrated. Eleanor smiled in public, cried in private. She said you terrified her, not because you were cruel, but because you were powerful. She didn't want to be owned. "And you volunteered to take her place?" he asked coldly. "No," Isabella replied. "I was ordered." She lifted her sleeve, revealing a faint scar along her wrist. "I've been trained since childhood to serve where Eleanor could not. Languages, etiquette, history. I was taught to become her shadow." Alexander studied the scar, then her face. This was no rehearsed story. The details were too ugly to be invented. On the wedding morning, Isabella continued. Eleanor locked herself in her chamber. She said she'd rather die than walk down that aisle. My mother looked at me and said, "Put on the dress." Alexander exhaled slowly. "You knew the punishment," he said. "Yes. And you still came." "I came because I knew you would see the truth eventually," Isabella said softly. "And because I believed you were not the monster Eleanor feared." The words landed with unexpected weight. Alexander turned away again, his jaw tight. Belief is a foolish thing to gamble a life on. Sometimes it's all we have. Silence stretched between them, thick and uneasy. You will remain here, Alexander said finally. Publicly, you are my wife. Privately, you are under guard. If this scandal reaches the court, both houses fall. Understand, Isabella said. Your family will be summoned, he added. They will answer for this deception. Her eyes flickered with something like relief. Thank you. He glanced at her sharply. For what? For making them face it. Later that day, the castle buzzed with controlled chaos. Servants whispered, guards doubled their patrols, and messengers were sent under sealed orders. Isabella was escorted through corridors with careful politeness, watched at every turn. From behind carved doors and tapestries, eyes followed her. A fake duchess, a scandal waiting to explode. At luncheon, Alexander sat at the head of the table. Isabella sat beside him, as tradition demanded. Nobles watched closely, searching for cracks. Smile, Alexander murmured without looking at her. She did. Perfectly. You learn quickly, he said. I had years of practice, she replied quietly. As the days passed, Alexander tested her. He asked questions about politics, border disputes, and foreign courts, topics Eleanor had always avoided. Isabella answered calmly, intelligently, sometimes even offering insights he had not considered. It unsettled him. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Alexander found Isabella in the library, reading by firelight. You read military strategy? He asked. She looked up. It was the only way to understand how power moves. And why would you need that? She closed the book. Because powerless people survive by predicting danger. Alexander felt something shift again, subtle but undeniable. You're not what I expected, he admitted. Neither are you, she replied. Days turned into a week. The Whitmore family had not yet arrived. Eleanor remained hidden. The court grew restless, and Alexander began to notice things he did not want to notice. The way Isabella listened instead of speaking. The way she challenged him in private, but never undermined him in public. The way she flinched at raised voices, yet stood firm when threatened. She was not obedient. She was resilient. One night, he found her standing on the balcony, staring into the dark. You could run, he said. You know the guard's patterns now. She shook her head. If I run, Eleanor pays the price. You still protect her, he noted. She is my sister, and she betrayed you. Yes. Alexander leaned against the stone railing. If you had the choice, would you still have come? Isabella was quiet for a long moment. No, she said honestly, but I would still choose to survive. Alexander studied her profile, sharp and unyielding against the night sky. You may be trapped here, he said, but Raven Shade does not destroy its own without reason. She met his gaze. Then perhaps I am safer than I thought. As thunder rolled in the distance, Alexander realized the truth he had been avoiding. The woman beside him was not the bride he had chosen, but she was becoming something far more dangerous to him than scandal. The Whitmore family arrived under gray skies and tighter guards than protocol allowed. Their carriage rolled into the courtyard like a condemned thing, wheels crunching over gravel while soldiers lined the path in silent judgment. Duke Alexander watched from the balcony as Lord and Lady Whitmore stepped down, faces composed, eyes sharp with calculation. Eleanor followed last, veiled and trembling. Isabella stood beside Alexander, her expression carefully neutral. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but she did not look at her sister. Remember, Alexander murmured, you speak only when spoken to. She nodded. In the great hall, the confrontation unfolded. Alexander sat on the ducal throne, Isabella at his right hand. The Whitmores were made to stand. The imbalance of power was deliberate. You deceived the house of Raven Shade, Alexander said, his voice echoing off stone. You committed fraud against the crown and insulted every noble present at my wedding. Lord Whitmore bowed stiffly. We acted out of desperation. Desperation does not excuse treason, Alexander replied. Eleanor's shoulders shook. She stepped forward suddenly. It was my fault, she cried. I couldn't marry him. I was afraid. I begged them not to force me. Alexander's gaze hardened. So you sent your sister instead. Eleanor collapsed to her knees. I didn't think you'd notice. The words cut deeper than any apology. Isabella's fingers curled in her lap. Alexander felt her tension without looking at her. You gambled her life, he said coldly. And my honor. Lady Whitmore finally spoke. Isabella was raised for sacrifice. She was always stronger. The hall went silent. Isabella lifted her head sharply, eyes burning. Alexander stood. The movement alone silenced the room. You will never speak of her that way again. Shock flickered across Lady Whitmore's face. Your titles will be suspended, Alexander continued. Your lands placed under royal review. Eleanor Whitmore will remain here under supervision. Eleanor looked up in horror. No, please. You will live, Alexander said. That is mercy. His gaze shifted to Isabella. As for my wife, the word hung heavy. She remains Duchess of Ravenshade. Gasps rippled through the hall. Isabella's breath caught. You cannot be serious, Lord Whitmore protested. Alexander's eyes flashed. You will remember who decides what is serious here. The Whitmores were escorted out under guard. Eleanor looked back once, her eyes full of regret and fear. Isabella did not return the look. That night, Isabella finally broke. In the quiet of her chamber, she sank to the floor, shaking. The mask she wore for survival cracked at last. A knock came softly. Go away, she whispered. The door opened anyway. Alexander stepped inside. You defended me, she said without looking up. I corrected an injustice, he replied. She laughed bitterly. You married the wrong twin and kept her anyway. The court will whisper for years. Let them, Alexander said. He knelt in front of her, surprising them both. You are not expendable. The words shattered something inside her. Tears spilled freely now. No one has ever said that to me, she admitted. Alexander hesitated, then placed his cloak around her shoulders. The gesture was intimate, dangerous. Get up, he said gently. Duchesses do not break on cold floors. Days passed. Eleanor remained confined to a distant wing. Rumors spread, but Alexander's authority crushed open scandal. Isabella learned quickly how to navigate the court, how to command rooms with silence instead of fear. Yet danger brewed beneath the surface. One evening, Isabella overheard servants whispering about poison, about factions unhappy with the Whitmore punishment, about removing the false Duchess. She went straight to Alexander. Someone is planning to kill me, she said plainly. Alexander's expression darkened. Then they're planning to die. He doubled her guards, but Isabella knew threats rarely announced themselves twice. The attack came 3 nights later. A maid entered Isabella's chamber with evening tea. Isabella noticed the woman's hand shaking. Too much. Leave it, Isabella said. The maid lunged. Isabella reacted without thought, overturning the tray, grabbing the knife hidden beneath the cloth. They struggled, crashing into furniture. Isabella slammed the woman's wrist against the table. The blade clattered to the floor. Guards burst in moments later. Alexander arrived seconds after. When he saw Isabella's bloodied sleeve, something inside him snapped. Who sent you? He demanded of the captured assassin. The woman laughed. You married a mistake. Alexander drew his sword. Touch her again, he said to the room, and I will burn your houses to ash. Later, in the aftermath, Alexander stood with Isabella in the quiet corridor. You should have been protected, he said. I protected myself, she replied. He looked at her, really looked at her, and understood the truth fully now. She was not a mistake. She was a threat to enemies, to tradition, and to his carefully controlled heart. The court changed after the attack. Fear crept into the halls like smoke, unseen but suffocating. Whispers no longer questioned whether Isabella belonged at Ravenshade, but how long she would survive there. Nobles watched her with new eyes, some calculating, some wary, some openly hostile. Alexander responded with ruthless efficiency. The assassin's interrogation was swift, brutal, and private. Names surfaced, minor lords, distant relatives, offended allies. Not powerful enough to challenge him openly, but desperate enough to gamble on blood. Their punishment was quiet yet devastating. Titles stripped, trade routes severed, families ruined without a single sword raised. Isabella saw the aftermath without being told. She understood power now, not as theory, but as consequence. One morning, Alexander summoned her to the war chamber. Maps covered the table, borders marked in red and black. "Sit," he said. She did, studying the maps. "You're preparing for rebellion." "For prevention," he corrected. She pointed to a coastal region. "This house depends on Ravenshade grain shipments. They will not move against you." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "You've been studying the ledgers." "I listen," she replied. For the first time, he smiled. Brief, genuine. "You think like a ruler," he said. She met his gaze. "I think like someone who refuses to be powerless again." Their partnership began without ceremony. Alexander tested her judgment, and she proved herself again and again. She advised restraint where force would provoke unity against him. She suggested generosity where punishment would breed desperation. And, slowly, the court noticed. "She is changing him," they whispered. Isabella paid little attention. Her concern lay elsewhere. Eleanor had grown ill in confinement. Fever, trembling, regret that came too late. Against her better judgment, Isabella asked Alexander for permission to see her. He studied her face. "Do not expect closure," he warned. The room where Eleanor lay was dim and heavy with the scent of herbs. Eleanor looked smaller, fragile in ways Isabella had never been allowed to be. "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered as Isabella approached. Isabella said nothing. "They punished our parents," Eleanor continued. "They hate me now." Isabella's voice was calm. "They used me." Eleanor reached for her hand. Isabella let her. "I didn't think you'd survive," Eleanor said through tears. Isabella pulled her hand away. "That is the difference between us." She left without looking back. That night, Isabella dreamed of fire and crowns. She woke to shouting. Rebels had breached the outer wall. A coordinated strike, faster than expected. Alexander was already armored when she reached him. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "No," she said. "If they win, I die anyway." Steel clashed in the courtyard. Isabella moved with instinct sharpened by fear. She saw an opening, shouted a warning, and Alexander turned just in time to avoid a killing blow. The battle ended at dawn. Bodies lay scattered like broken oaths. Afterward, in the quiet, Alexander took Isabella's bloodied hands in his. "You saved my life." She held his gaze. "You made it worth saving." The words lingered between them, dangerous and undeniable. That evening, Alexander dismissed the guards from the private chambers. Silence filled the space. "This marriage began with a lie," he said. "Yes, it does not have to remain one." Isabella's breath caught. "I won't replace her. Not again." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I'm asking you to choose." She searched his face, looking for coercion, command, expectation. She found none. "I choose myself," she said. Alexander nodded. "Then stand with me as an equal." Their kiss was not rushed. It was cautious, deliberate, forged from trust, earned the hard way. Outside, Ravenshade stood scarred but unbroken. And for the first time, Isabella did not feel like a shadow pretending to be a duchess. She was one. The weeks following the rebellion were quieter, but the silence carried weight. Ravenshade Castle bore scars, cracked stone, scorched banners, empty seats at council tables, but it still stood. So did Isabella. So did Alexander. And the court understood something fundamental had shifted. Isabella no longer walked the halls as a tolerated secret. She walked as a duchess whose survival had been paid for in blood. Nobles bowed deeper. Guards straightened faster. Servants listened when she spoke. Respect, she learned, did not always come from love. Often, it came from certainty. Alexander watched the change with a mixture of pride and unease. He had ruled alone for so long that sharing authority felt like learning to breathe in a different rhythm. Yet Isabella never overstepped. She asked when she needed to, spoke when it mattered, and when she disagreed, she did so privately, with reason instead of rebellion. At council one morning, a lord from the eastern provinces challenged her openly. "Duchess," he said with a thin smile, "forgive my bluntness, but some still question the legitimacy of your position. The room went still. Isabella did not look to Alexander. She met the Lord's gaze calmly. Legitimacy is proven by service, she replied, not by birth alone. Ask the families who slept safely during the rebellion, whose authority protected them. Murmurs followed. The Lord had no answer. Afterward, Alexander stopped her in the corridor. You could have let me handle that. I know, she said, but I won't always hide behind your shadow. He studied her, then nodded. Good. Not all threats came with banners and swords. Letters arrived sealed in foreign wax. Invitations that were really tests. Allies wanted reassurance that Ravenshade was stable. Enemies searched for weakness. One such invitation came from the northern court, a grand winter gathering, neutral ground, heavy with politics. They want to see us together, Alexander said, to decide whether we are real. Isabella understood immediately. If I hesitate, they will circle. Yes. She met his eyes. Then we go. The journey north was long and cold. Snow stretched endlessly across the landscape, white and merciless. Inside the carriage, silence pressed close. You don't have to do this, Alexander said quietly. Isabella shook her head. For the first time in my life, I do. The northern palace glittered with ice and gold. Kings, queens, and power-hungry heirs filled its halls. Eyes followed Isabella everywhere. They weighed her, measured her, searched for cracks. At the banquet, a foreign prince leaned close. You don't look like a woman who was meant to be here. Isabella smiled thinly. Neither do most rulers. Alexander hid his smile behind a cup of wine. That night, rumors moved faster than footsteps. Someone claimed Isabella was still a pretender. Another claimed Alexander planned to discard her once stability returned. Isabella confronted him in their chambers. If that were true, she said, I would like to know. Alexander did not evade the question. I have discarded many things in my life when they stopped being useful, he said honestly. You're not one of them. Not useful, she repeated. Essential, he corrected. The words settled deep in her chest, frightening and warm. On the final night of the gathering, an attempt was made, not on Isabella, but on Alexander. A poison blade meant for his back found her shoulder instead. Pain exploded. She did not scream. She shoved Alexander aside and collapsed. Guards swarmed. Chaos erupted. When Isabella woke, everything hurt. Her arm burned, fever pulsing through her veins. Alexander sat beside her bed, his expression stripped of all pretense. You took the blade meant for me, he said hoarsely. I changed the pattern, she replied weakly. He closed his eyes briefly. I cannot rule without you. She forced a small smile. Good. I was getting tired of pretending I didn't care. Recovery was slow. The poison had been weak, but deliberate. Another warning. Another test failed by their enemies. Back at Ravenshade, Alexander made an announcement that stunned the court. The Duchess will preside over council in my absence, he declared. Her word carries mine. Some resisted. Most did not dare. Isabella felt the weight of it all late one night, alone in the library. Power, she realized, was not a crown. It was a responsibility that never slept. Alexander found her there. You're allowed to rest. She looked up. If I rest, I remember who I was. And who is that? Someone who was never chosen. He sat across from her. You are chosen now. Every day. The truth finally settled between them. Not as romance, but as something stronger. Partnership born of fire and refusal to break. Outside, Ravenshade prepared for a new era. Not because winter tightened its grip on Ravenshade, sealing roads with ice and slowing the flow of messengers. Isolation bred opportunity, and Alexander knew it. Power rarely challenged openly when swords were ready. It waited for fatigue, doubt, and division. The first sign came as a ledger discrepancy. Isabella noticed it during a late-night review, candle wax pooling beside her hand. Grain shipments listed as delivered had never arrived. The loss was small, precise, testing, not stealing. She brought it to Alexander without alarm. Someone is measuring our response, she said. Or our patience, he replied. They traced the trail together. A steward loyal to a minor house. A route altered twice. A a bribe disguised as a dowry payment. It was subtle, clever, and arrogant. Alexander summoned the steward at dawn. Isabella stood beside him, silent, watching the man's eyes dart. When confronted with proof, he confessed quickly, too quickly. They promised protection, he said Ravenshade was changing, that the Duke had gone soft. Alexander's jaw tightened. Isabella spoke before he could. Softness is mercy without memory, she said calmly. We have both. The steward was exiled, his patron fined publicly. The message traveled faster than any raven. Still, the sense of being watched remained. It culminated in a proposal wrapped in velvet. A neighboring power offered a military alliance, on one condition. A formal heir, the envoy said smoothly. Stability requires certainty. The words were polite. The meaning was not. They wanted Isabella replaced, or controlled, or erased by ceremony. Alexander dismissed the envoy without answer. That night, he paced their chamber, anger radiating from him. They will not dictate my household, he said. Isabella watched him, thoughtful. They are afraid, she said. An heir represents permanence, and permanence frightens those who profit from chaos. You don't owe them a child, he snapped. I owe myself honesty, she replied. The silence that followed was heavy but not brittle. They had learned how to speak without breaking. I don't know if I want that, Isabella continued. Not yet. Not because someone demands it. Alexander stopped pacing. Nor should you. Spring came late and violent. Floods tore through the lower villages, washing away homes and fields. Isabella rode out with supplies before Alexander could argue. She stood in mud and rain, distributing aid, listening to grief without flinching. When she returned, exhausted and soaked, the court had already begun to talk. She rules with her hands, they said. Alexander found her asleep at a table, maps scattered beneath her cheek. He covered her with his cloak, careful not to wake her. The next challenge arrived unannounced. Eleanor escaped. She was found at the border 2 days later, thin and frantic, claiming Isabella had stolen her life. The accusation spread faster than truth ever did. Isabella faced her sister in the council chamber. You took everything, Eleanor said through tears. Even my place in the world. Isabella's voice did not shake. You abandoned it. I was afraid. So was I, Isabella replied. The difference is what we did with it. Alexander ended the exchange. Eleanor was sent to a convent beyond Ravenshade's reach, alive but powerless. Mercy with memory. That night, Isabella stood on the battlements, staring into the dark. Do you regret keeping me? She asked quietly. Alexander joined her. I regret that anyone taught you to ask that. She leaned into the cold stone. Power keeps asking things of me. Pieces. It asks everyone, he said, but it doesn't get to choose which pieces you give. She turned to him then. If I fall, it won't be quietly. A smile touched his mouth. I know. Summer approached, bringing with it a conclave of houses. Old enemies would sit at the same table. Old debts would surface. Before the conclave, an attempt was made on Isabella's reputation rather than her life. Letters surfaced, forged but convincing, painting her as a manipulator who had orchestrated the twins' switch from the start. Isabella read them once, then burned them. They want me to defend myself, she said. To scramble. Alexander nodded. Then don't. At the conclave, Isabella spoke only once. I was raised to disappear, she said calmly to the gathered lords. If I had wanted power by deceit, I would have taken it and run. I stayed. I bled. I rebuilt. Believe what you wish. Silence followed. Then applause, scattered at first, then steady. That night, as lanterns lit the courtyards, Alexander took her hand openly. Not as a statement, as a choice. You don't belong to Ravenshade because of marriage, he said. Ravenshade belongs to you because you chose it. Isabella looked out over the lights, the people, the land she had nearly lost before she ever held it. For the first time, she said softly, I am not surviving. What are you doing? She met his eyes. Building. Autumn returned with sharp winds and clearer skies, and with it came a sense of reckoning. Ravenshade was stronger now, visibly so, Yet strength attracted challenge as surely as blood drew wolves. Isabella felt it in the way messengers lingered, in the way counselors chose their words with care. The first challenge arrived cloaked as respect. A delegation from the Southern Territories requested audience, praising Isabella's leadership, admiring her resolve, and then, slowly, suggesting reform. Shared councils, distributed authority, less power concentrated in one house. Alexander listened in silence. Isabella listened for what was not said. They want access, she murmured later. They want leverage, Alexander agreed. But not war, she added. No, he said, not yet. Isabella proposed a compromise that startled the court. Limited trade privileges in exchange for military transparency. Cooperation without surrender. The Southern lords accepted, unsettled but impressed. She negotiates like a blade wrapped in silk, one whispered. Alexander heard it. He did not disagree. That night, Isabella admitted something she had kept buried. Every time I succeed, she said, I expect punishment. Alexander looked at her steadily. It won't come from me. She nodded, but habits shaped by fear were slow to fade. Weeks later, a trial tested them both. A Ravenshade commander was accused of executing prisoners during the rebellion. Evidence was circumstantial. The man had served Alexander faithfully for years. The court expected dismissal. Isabella ordered a full inquiry. You will anger the army, Alexander warned privately. I know, she replied. But if we excuse this, we become it. The trial was public. Witnesses spoke. Lies cracked. The commander was found guilty. His punishment was exile, not death. Justice without spectacle. The army grumbled. Then it adapted. That night, Alexander stood beside Isabella in the empty hall. You chose the harder path. I always do, she said. And yet they follow you. She met his gaze. Because they know where it leads. Winter preparations began early. Grain stores filled. Borders tightened. Isabella reorganized relief systems so villages would not starve if roads closed. She wrote policies, not proclamations. Alexander realized something unsettling. Ravenshade no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a state. An assassin tried once more, this time with words. A bard sang a ballad in the lower city, twisting Isabella's past into a tale of ambition and theft. The song spread. Isabella listened to it once. Then she invited the bard to the castle. Sing it again, she said calmly. He did. His voice shook by the final verse. Now sing this, Isabella said, handing him a new parchment. It told the truth. Not glorified, not softened. The twin, the lie, the survival, the work afterward. The bard sang that song instead. It replaced the first. Alexander watched from the shadows, understanding her power more clearly than ever. She did not erase narratives. She replaced them with something stronger. As winter settled, Alexander fell ill. Fever struck hard and fast, leaving him weak and disoriented. The court panicked. Isabella did not. She took command without announcement. Orders went out. Borders sealed. Succession contingencies drafted quietly but firmly. At his bedside, she spoke to him even when he could not answer. You taught me not to fear silence, she said softly. So rest. When he woke days later, thinner and exhausted, she was there, eyes shadowed but steady. You ruled, he rasped. We ruled, she corrected. Recovery was slow. During it, Alexander saw what others already had. Ravenshade obeyed Isabella without hesitation. Not because she was his wife, because she was their leader. One evening, as snow fell thick outside, Alexander said what had been building for months. I will formalize this, he said. Equal authority. In writing. Isabella studied him. You don't have to. I do, he replied. For Ravenshade. And for me. She nodded once. The decree was signed the next morning. 2 names. 2 seals. 1 rule. The court reacted with shock, then adjustment. The world did not end. Borders did not collapse. Instead, stability deepened. That night, Isabella stood at the window, watching snow bury old tracks. They will test us harder now, she said. Alexander joined her. Let them. She turned to him, certainty finally outweighing fear. I was never meant to wear a crown, she said. He took her hand. No, you were meant to change what it means. The decree changed everything, though not all at once. Power never shifted like a falling stone. It moved like water, slow and relentless, reshaping every surface it touched. With two rulers instead of one, the court began to reveal its true loyalties. Some adapted, some resisted, some waited for the first crack. Isabella felt the pressure immediately. Requests doubled. Disputes that once went to Alexander alone were now brought to her, sometimes deliberately, sometimes defensively. She became the balance point between mercy and consequence, between tradition and reform. Alexander watched closely, not to control her, but to learn. He had ruled by command. She ruled by endurance. The first real test of their shared authority came from within Ravenshade itself. The Western Marches, long loyal but fiercely independent, refused to accept Isabella's seal on military orders. Their marshal sent a message wrapped in courtesy and threat. "We answer to the Duke," it read, "not to a replacement." Isabella read it once, then folded the parchment carefully. "They want you to override me," she said to Alexander. "They want me to choose," he replied. She met his eyes. "And will you?" Alexander did not answer immediately. Instead, he handed the message back to her. "You will." Isabella rode to the Western Marches alone, against every piece of advice given. The journey was long and deliberate. She arrived without escort banners, without spectacle. The marshal received her in a stone hall that smelled of iron and old victories. "You're brave," he said bluntly. "Or foolish." "Both," Isabella replied. He laughed once. "You have no claim here." She stepped forward, placing Alexander's signet and her own seal side by side on the table. "Then test them," she said. "Refuse me, and you refuse him." The room went quiet. "You think he won't correct this?" the marshal asked. "I know he won't," Isabella said calmly. "Because this isn't about authority. It's about whether Ravenshade moves forward or fractures itself pretending the past still rules." She spoke for hours, not threatening, not pleading. She spoke of supply lines, of border fatigue, of soldiers who deserve clarity instead of politics. She spoke as someone who understood cost. When she finished, the marshal bowed. Not deeply, not easily, but fully. "We will answer," he said. By the time Isabella returned to the capital, word had spread. Not of submission, but of recognition. Alexander met her at the gates. "You didn't need me," he said quietly. "I needed you to trust me," she replied. Winter loosened its grip slowly. With spring came festivals, trade caravans, and something far more dangerous, hope. People began to believe Ravenshade could be different, more just, less brittle. Hope made people bold. A group of minor houses petitioned Isabella directly, bypassing Alexander entirely, seeking reforms that would weaken ducal authority. She refused them publicly. "You mistake balance for division," she said. "I will not be used as a wedge." Some praised her. Others resented her. That resentment found form in fire. One night, the old records hall burned. Centuries of documents, treaties, debts, ashes by morning. The loss was strategic, not random. Someone wanted memory erased. Isabella stood before the ruins at dawn, smoke clinging to her clothes. "They're trying to unwrite us," she said. "They won't," Alexander replied. But the damage was done. Borders disputes reemerged. Old claims resurfaced. Enemies smiled. Isabella responded with an unexpected move. She opened the archives to the public, what remained of them. Scholars, clerks, and citizens were invited to help reconstruct history. "They expect secrecy," she said, "so we give transparency." It worked better than anyone predicted. Truth rebuilt faster when shared. Not everyone celebrated. A letter arrived from beyond the sea. The Empire had been watching, and now it wanted something. A summit. "They will test you," Alexander warned. "They already are," Isabella replied. The summit was held on neutral ground. Emperors, regents, and generals filled a marble hall built to intimidate. Isabella felt the weight of their gazes immediately. "You are unusual," the empress said with thin amusement. "A ruler without blood claim." Isabella inclined her head. "Blood claims are history. I am the present." The talks were brutal. Trade, borders, influence. At one point, the Empress leaned forward. "Step aside," she said quietly. "Let the Duke rule. You will be spared the consequences of his enemies." Isabella smiled without warmth. "You misunderstand," she said. "I am not standing beside him. We are standing together." When the summit ended, no one had won, which meant Ravenshade had. On the journey home, Alexander broke the silence. "They fear you." "They should," Isabella said. That night, back in their chambers, the distance between them felt different. Not cautious, not restrained, honest. "You don't need me anymore," Alexander said softly. Isabella turned to him. "I never needed you to survive. And now, she said, "I want you." It was not a confession of weakness. It was a declaration of choice. Outside, spring storms rolled over Ravenshade, washing ash from stone, feeding new growth. The land was changing. So were its rulers. And somewhere in the shadows, those who had lost power watched carefully, waiting for the moment when two leaders might finally be divided. Stays patient when it senses transformation. By early summer, Ravenshade's enemies had shifted from probing to planning. Isabella felt it in the pattern of silence between messages, in the sudden politeness of old rivals. Calm, she knew, often meant coordination. The warning came from an unexpected source. A former Whitmore retainer, long presumed loyal to Eleanor, arrived at the gates at dawn, wounded and desperate. He carried proof of a pact, several houses, foreign funds, one purpose. Remove Isabella, not assassinate, discredit, isolate, force Alexander to choose publicly. They believe if you are stripped of authority, Ravenshade will fracture on its own, Alexander said after reading the documents. Isabella nodded. They don't understand us. The conspirators moved first in the court of opinion. Petitions accused Isabella of overreach. Pamphlets questioned her legitimacy again, this time with careful language and legal argument. No lies, just emphasis. Alexander could have ended it with one decree. He did not. "This is your fight," he said, "but not alone." Isabella addressed the court in full session. She did not defend her past. She questioned their future. "You accepted my authority when it was convenient," she said calmly. "You benefited from my decisions. Now you fear what shared power means. So ask yourselves, do you oppose me, or do you oppose change?" The room fractured. Some stood with her openly. Others stayed silent. Silence, she noted, was no longer consent. That night, Isabella received an invitation to a private meeting. "Neutral ground. Arbitration. It's a trap," Alexander said. "Yes," Isabella replied, "but not for us." They arrived separately. The hall was small, the atmosphere heavy. Representatives of the conspiring houses sat waiting. "We want peace," one said smoothly. "Step back. Remain Duchess in name. Let the Duke rule alone." Isabella looked at them without anger. "You're afraid I won't step aside when it's your turn to ask," she said. Another leaned forward. "You are replaceable." Isabella smiled. "Then replace me." Alexander stepped from the shadows. The shock in the room was immediate. "You are negotiating against my authority," he said coldly. "And you forgot something." He placed a document on the table. Seals, witnesses, proof of treason, financial ties, correspondence, plans. "I was never choosing between her and you," Alexander continued. "I was choosing Ravenshade." The meeting ended with arrests. Quiet. Final. The following days were brutal but controlled. Titles revoked. Lands reassigned. No executions. No martyrs. Only absence. Still, the damage lingered. Trust, once cracked, did not fully heal. Isabella felt it keenly. She had won, but the cost weighed on her. One evening, she stood alone in the old records hall, rebuilt but thinner, like memory itself. "I didn't want to become this," she said when Alexander joined her. "You didn't," he replied. "You became necessary." She exhaled slowly. "Is that better?" "It's real," he said. The world responded to Ravenshade's consolidation with caution. Trade resumed under stricter terms. Borders stabilized. No one rushed to challenge a state that had survived internal fracture without collapsing. Late that summer, Isabella made a decision that surprised everyone. She proposed a public council seat for commoners. Non-voting, advisory, permanent. They will hate this, Alexander said. They will adapt, she replied. The announcement caused outrage, then curiosity, then participation. Farmers spoke of floods, merchants of tariffs, soldiers of exhaustion. Ravenshade listened. Not all voices were kind. Isabella heard them anyway. One night, she confessed something she had never said aloud. If I had not survived that wedding, she said quietly, no one would have noticed. Alexander took her hand. The world notices now. Autumn approached again. A year since the wedding. A year since the lie. The court prepared for commemoration. Celebration. Proof of continuity. Isabella watched it all with calm distance. Continuity was fragile. On the eve of the anniversary, a messenger arrived breathless. The Empire was mobilizing near the border. Alexander read the report twice. They think we're distracted. Isabella straightened. Then we show them we are not. They stood together over the map table, not as symbols, not as exceptions, but as rulers who had been tested by fire and chosen to stand. Outside, the wind shifted. War, Isabella knew, was not always declared with drums. Sometimes it arrived as an assumption. The assumption spread faster than an army. Border villages reported unusual patrols. Trade caravans were delayed by inspections that felt less like caution and more like counting. The Empire had not declared war, but it was measuring distance, timing, resolve. Alexander convened the council at once. Maps were unfurled. Messengers stood ready. The room was tense, sharpened by memory of past conflicts. They expect hesitation, one general said. They expect division, Isabella added. Alexander looked at her. Then we deny them both. Isabella proposed the unthinkable. A preemptive diplomatic strike paired with visible military readiness. Not an ultimatum, an invitation backed by certainty. Invite their envoys to Ravenshade, she said. Let them see stability, not speculation. Some objected. That risks humiliation if they refuse. Isabella's gaze was steady. Refusal would expose their intent. Acceptance exposes their weakness. Alexander nodded. Do it. Preparations began immediately. Ravenshade transformed. Banners repaired. Roads cleared. Garrisons rotated with precision that left nothing to chance. Isabella oversaw logistics personally, ensuring supplies could sustain both feast and defense. When the imperial envoys arrived, they were met not with ceremony alone, but with order. No panic, no overcompensation. At the opening council, the imperial chancellor smiled thinly. You rule differently here, he observed. We rule intentionally, Isabella replied. Negotiations were sharp, measured. The empire tested boundaries, hinted at ancient claims, questioned succession. Isabella did not argue history. She argued present capability. Our borders are defended, she said calmly. Our people are fed. Our command is unified. The chancellor leaned back. And if we are not convinced, Alexander answered, then you will be. The implication was clear. Not a threat. A fact. That night, an imperial scout was captured inside Ravenshade territory. The message was unmistakable. The Empire was watching even while talking. Isabella insisted the capture be made public. Let them know we see them, she said. The envoy protested. This will be taken as provocation. Only by those already provoked, Isabella replied. The Empire withdrew its envoys 2 days later. No agreement. No war. Yet, Alexander stood on the battlements with Isabella as the last banners disappeared into the distance. They will return, he said. Yes, she replied, but not as confidently. The court breathed again, but Isabella did not relax. She knew what came next. War rarely began at the border. It began at home. Her fears were confirmed within weeks. A food riot broke out in the lower city, sparked by false rumors of shortages. The pattern was familiar. External pressure fueling internal fracture. Isabella went to the city herself. No guard in front. No speech prepared. She stood among the crowd and listened. When she finally spoke, it was simple. You are not starving. You are being frightened. She ordered the granaries open for inspection. Let the people see the truth. The riot dissolved into shame and anger redirected outward. Alexander watched from a distance, understanding something he had not before. Authority did not always require force. Sometimes it required presence. As winter approached again, intelligence confirmed what they already suspected. The Empire was arming allies along Ravenshade's edges. A proxy war was forming. Alexander called for mobilization. Isabella called for alliances. They worked without pause. Days blurred. Decisions stacked upon decisions. There was no room left for doubt. One night, exhausted, Isabella finally asked the question she had avoided for a year. "If war comes," she said quietly, "and they demand my removal as terms for peace, what will you do?" Alexander did not answer immediately. He stepped closer, resting his forehead against hers. "I will refuse," he said, "and if that costs us everything, then we will lose it together." She closed her eyes, the weight of that choice settling deep. "I never wanted to be the reason people die," she whispered. "You're the reason they stand a chance to live," he replied. The first snow fell that night, early and heavy. Ravensshade prepared once more, not as a house clinging to tradition, but as a state forged by choice, tested by enemies, and led by two rulers who had learned the cost of survival. Somewhere beyond the border, armies moved, and Isabella, once a shadow sent to replace another, stood at the center of history, no longer waiting for permission to exist, ready to face whatever assumption came next. The first clash did not come with banners or declarations. It came as fire in the night. A border village burned before dawn, its watchtower reduced to ash, its fields trampled by soldiers who vanished as quickly as they had appeared. No insignia, no prisoners, only proof. Alexander read the report in silence. Isabella stood beside him, hands flat on the table. "They're testing response time," she said. "In resolve," he replied. They responded with precision. Patrols doubled. Supply routes hardened. Messengers carried identical orders to every border garrison. No confusion. No delay. Within days, more incidents followed. Skirmishes disguised as banditry. Trade disruptions blamed on weather. The Empire denied involvement while benefiting from every fracture. Isabella refused to play the denial game. She addressed the council plainly. "This is war," she said, "just not the kind written in chronicles." Alexander authorized a countermeasure long considered too risky. Ravenshade would expose the Empire's proxies publicly, forcing them into the open. Names, payments, movements. The risk was enormous. So was the payoff. When the evidence was released, the Empire protested loudly. Allies hesitated. Neutral states took notice. They expected secrecy, Isabella said. We gave them sunlight. The retaliation was immediate. A coordinated strike hit 3 outposts simultaneously. This time, Ravenshade struck back, not with brute force, but with speed. Units trained for flexibility moved through terrain the Empire had underestimated. Alexander led from a field. Isabella led from the capital. The balance held. Every night, reports crossed between them. Short, exact, honest. One night, a message arrived late. Too late. Alexander had been injured. Not mortally. Enough. Isabella did not panic. She issued orders, sealed corridors, and stabilized command before allowing herself to breathe. When Alexander was brought back under guard, pale but conscious, she was there. "You broke formation," she said softly. He managed a weak smile. "Old habits." She took his hand. We agreed. Together. The near loss changed everything. The court, the army, the people. Fear sharpened into unity. Isabella made a decision that altered the course of the war. She sent envoys not to kings, but to cities, trade leagues, independent ports, groups the Empire relied on but did not rule directly. "Neutrality is a luxury you cannot afford," her message said. The response was slow, then overwhelming. Supplies flowed to Ravenshade. Intelligence followed. The Empire's reach faltered. Winter deepened. Fighting slowed, but did not stop. Both sides waited for advantage. On the longest night of the year, Isabella stood alone in the chapel where the wedding had taken place a year before. The candles were unlit, the pews empty. She remembered the fear, the lie, the moment she had walked forward not knowing if she would survive the night. Now she was sending others to face death. The weight was unbearable. Necessary. Alexander found her there. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said. She turned to him, exhaustion etched into her face. "I know. That's why I'm still standing." News came at dawn. A major imperial ally had withdrawn support. The war tilted, subtly but decisively. The empire sued for talks. Not peace. Talks. Alexander looked to Isabella. "We hold the line," she said. "No concessions yet." Negotiations dragged on. The empire pushed for symbolic victories. Isabella refused them all. "This war began because you assumed I could be removed," she said to the imperial negotiator. "It will end when you stop assuming." Spring came again. The fighting slowed to near stillness. Exhaustion weighed on everyone. At last, the empire offered what it had not before. Recognition. Formal. Public. Ravenshade as sovereign. Isabella as co-ruler. Borders acknowledged. Alexander read the terms carefully. "They're yielding without saying the word." Isabella nodded. "They don't need to say it." The treaty was signed under open sky. No triumphal speeches. No parades. Just ink and witnesses. When it was done, Isabella felt something unfamiliar. Relief without fear. That night, back at Ravenshade, bells rang. Not for victory, but for survival. Alexander stood with her on the balcony. "You were never replaceable," he said. She watched the lights below, steady and warm. Neither was this land. The war had not made them legends. It had made them real. Peace did not arrive like a sunrise. It settled like dust after collapse, slow, uneven, and impossible to ignore. Ravenshade woke each morning to the absence of alarms, to borders that held without blood, to messengers who carried trade figures instead of casualty lists. People smiled cautiously, as if joy itself needed permission. Isabella felt the shift more sharply than anyone. War had given her clarity. Peace brought questions. The first weeks after the treaty were consumed by repair. Roads rebuilt. Villages resettled. Soldiers rotated home in waves, some triumphant, some broken, all changed. Isabella insisted on seeing them herself, not in ceremonies, but in infirmaries and camps, listening to what they did not say. "You should rest," Alexander told her one night as she returned late, boots still muddy. "I will," she said, "after I understand what this cost." Alexander did not argue. He had learned when rest was avoidance and when it was earned. The court, however, was less patient. Peace emboldened those who had survived quietly. Old ambitions resurfaced, cloaked now in the language of stability and gratitude. "They want rewards," Alexander said after a particularly long council session. "They want restoration," Isabella corrected, "of a world that no longer exists." The first real fracture came from an unexpected quarter. The army. A delegation of senior officers requested audience. They were respectful, precise, and uneasy. "You change how we fight," their leader said carefully, "and how we are seen." Isabella listened. "We are grateful," he continued, "but many fear that restraint will be mistaken for weakness now that war is over." Isabella nodded slowly. "Restraint without readiness is weakness," she said. "Readiness without restraint is ruin. Which do you prefer?" The answer was immediate. "Then we adapt," the officer said. Alexander watched the exchange with quiet approval. Isabella had not commanded loyalty. She had explained necessity. Yet not all resistance was so reasonable. A month after the treaty, a petition arrived signed by several high houses. It demanded a formal review of the co-rulership decree. Peace, it argued, required clear hierarchy. They waited until the threat passed, Alexander said, anger flickering beneath his calm. Isabella took the document, reading every line. "They waited until they thought I'd soften," she said. "What do you want to do?" he asked. She folded the petition carefully. "Call them in." The hall was full when Isabella addressed them. No raised voice. No accusation. "You are asking me to step back," she said plainly. "Tell me why." One lord cleared his throat. Tradition, he said. Another added clarity. A third said nothing, eyes fixed on the floor. Isabella nodded. Tradition did not save Ravenshade, she said. Clarity did. And clarity came from shared command when single command failed. She paused. If you believe peace was won without that, then you are free to test the world without it. Silence followed. Alexander rose. This decree stands, he said, not because it favors my wife, because it favors Ravenshade. The petition was withdrawn, quietly, permanently. That night, Isabella felt the familiar ache of vigilance return. Victory had not ended the need to justify her existence. It had only changed the arguments. You're tired, Alexander said. Yes, she admitted, but not of ruling. As summer deepened, Ravenshade hosted its first open forum since the war. Representatives from cities, villages, and guilds gathered, not to petition, but to speak. Some praised, some criticized, some demanded more than could be given. Isabella listened to all of it. One farmer stood, hands shaking. My son died at the border, he said. I don't know why. Isabella stood with him. Neither do I, she said honestly. And that will haunt me. But if you want lies to make it easier, I won't give them. The man nodded once. It was enough. That evening, alone in the rebuilt records hall, Isabella finally allowed herself to sit in silence. She thought of the girl she had been, the shadow, the substitute, the invisible one. She had not imagined this ending. Alexander joined her, placing 2 cups of wine on the table. You did not vanish, he said softly. She smiled faintly. No, I became visible. Autumn returned again, gentler this time. Trade flourished. Borders held. Children played in streets, once empty. And yet, something restless stirred within Isabella. Peace had given her space to notice it. I don't know who I am without crisis, she confessed one night. Alexander considered her words. Then we build something that lasts longer than crisis, he said. What? Institutions, he replied, not dependent on us. The idea took root. Slowly, deliberately. Councils with defined powers. Laws written clearly, not interpreted by whim. Succession plans that did not depend on blood alone. Ravenshade began to change in ways that could not be undone by a single death. Not everyone approved, but no one could deny the stability. On the anniversary of the treaty, Isabella stood once more on the balcony overlooking the city. Bells rang below, not in warning, not in mourning, in rhythm. Alexander stood beside her. I was sent here to replace someone, she said quietly. To disappear once the lie was complete. And instead, he asked. She looked out over the lights, the people, the future unfolding without asking permission. Instead, she said, I stayed. And for the first time since the wedding day that had changed everything, Isabella did not feel like she was waiting for the world to decide whether she belonged. She already knew the answer.